delighted to take any questions that you have about being transgender, about Deborah Sampson, Revolutionary War, fiction writing, LGBT identity, whatever you want. Yes?
When you came out, what were your friends' opinions? Were they shocked, or did they see it in you?
It's a great way to put it. I think a lot of them saw it in me, as you say. I remember my senior year at Exeter, really wanting. I don't know if you have senior superlatives here, where you're like voted like most likely to succeed or something like that in the yearbook. Well, Exeter had a whole bunch, and I was gunning to be voted most changed since freshman year. But alas, I didn't get that superlative, and I complained about that to a friend of mine. She said, "Well, don't be an idiot. You haven't changed at all." And I think that was actually the perspective of a lot of my friends. They said, "You haven't become someone else. You've really just become yourself." Which isn't to say that there weren't rough times. I remember in particular that I was supposed to be roommates with a girl named Nancy, and I called her up a couple weeks before the start of the school year, and I said, "I'm going to be coming back as a guy. Is that going to make you uncomfortable?" And she was slight yes. So I got a single, and she got a new roommate, and over the course of the year, she and I had a lot of difficult conversations, but eventually she kind of came around and explained why she didn't want us to be my roommate, how she was worried about how it would reflect on her, and it wasn't so much about how she felt towards me. And those were good conversations to have, but they weren't easy. And I was sensitive to feeling like I had been rejected by her and others. Yeah.
How old were you when you decided you wanted to be a boy?
So I think I knew from as early as I can remember, from like really 3 or 4 years old. But I first heard the term transgender when I was 16, and that's when I came out. I came out just before I turned 17. Yeah.
Now, were you more friends with more females before the change, or were you friends with more guys, and then after the change, which gender stayed on?
That's an interesting question. So when I was a kid, almost all my friends were boys. And I was sort of one of the classic feral child in me. I'd go out into the woods behind my house and just run around. And I had friends who were girls, but I had many more friends who were boys. And then, the magic that is, or the horror that is 7th and 8th grade happened. And you're all past that, so I can say that to you. I sort of, in high school, I think because I was living in a girls' dorm and playing sports on girls' teams, that became my social world. I became friends with a lot more girls. And then after I came out, I would still say most of my friends were women. Although, as I've become an adult, I think it's not quite 50-50. A little bit skewed more towards women, but some guys. And mostly LGBT. Right? Yeah.
Was there a difference between your experience in high school and college?
Definitely. Yeah. So one of the great things, seniors, when you go off to college, is you get to be nobody for a while, right? You go to a place where no one knows you at college. And I was really excited about that. I was at a big school in a big dorm, and absolutely nobody knew who I was. It was terrifying and exciting all at once. And because nobody knew me, if I wanted someone to know that I was transgender, I had to tell them. Whereas at high school, everyone had known that I had been a woman for 3 years before, and then a man after that. So it was this process of I got to determine when and how and why I went for people. And that was empowering and also caused me a lot of thought. Why do I want to come out? Why do I want to tell people I'm transgender and not just have them assume? Yeah.
You said that before you came out of high school, you were a jock and you played all the sports. Did you continue that after?
Can't you tell from my physique?
Well, I mean, in high school at least.
Yeah. So I couldn't give it up in high school. I loved my sports teams. I've been with the same women on those teams for 3 years. And I continued to play my senior year on women's teams. After that, I decided not to play sports in college. I was recruited to be an ice hockey goalie at Harvard and decided to have a conversation with a coach about how it would feel to be a man on a women's team. Decided I couldn't do that. I didn't start taking testosterone until I was in my 20s, so it would have still been quite legal by NCAA to play on a women's team. And then my senior year in college, I got a call from the women's varsity ice hockey coaches. He said, my 2 goalies have gone down, one with a back injury and one with a groin injury. What do you say coming up and playing on my team? And I could not say no, because it was the Harvard women's varsity team in an Olympic year, and there were 2 women from the Canadian national team and 2 women on the American national team who were training for the Olympics. And when else in my life am I going to play with players that good? So I went out and skated with them until the goalie, the real goalie, recovered from their groin injury. I think they were happy to have her back. She was much better than I was. But it's always been hard for me to not be as good an athlete as a guy as I was as a girl. I coached boys cross country and girls ice hockey at St. George's, and it was somewhat satisfying when I could run faster than the guys on my team. Like, hey, old transgender guy beating you. But, I think part of coaching is finding the right inspiration. Yeah.
For the dormitories you were in, both at Exeter and at Harvard, did the administration give you any issues?
So I thought I'd be polite at Exeter, and before I came back, I gave them a call, and I said, by the way, thought you'd like to know I'll be coming back as a man. Will you tell me where you want me to live? And they sort of hemmed and hawed over it and offered me several awkward solutions, like, why don't you live in a faculty member's house? And I was like, no. So ultimately, it seemed safest and easiest just to continue living in the girls' dorm for that year. And I had many good conversations with the Exeter administration. Even better is that since I graduated, they've invited me back to campus to work with them to talk about how to make policy for other transgender students. And the same has been true at Harvard. It's kind of an ongoing question. Yeah.
When did you legally change your gender? Because you mentioned that like you changed your name. Was that when you also changed your gender at the same time, like legally, or was it like after?
It was later than that. Yeah, it's a really weird legal process to change your gender. So I changed my name when I was 18, and anybody can change their name when they're 18 for almost any reason, aside from like to avoid fraudulent checks or something like that. And then when I was 27 or so, no, when I was 25, I started taking testosterone. And after I'd been on testosterone for a couple of years, I decided I would try to change my gender or sex on my birth certificate. So I had my doctor write a note, getting out of school for a day, and she said, Alex lives as a man and takes testosterone, so his birth certificate should be changed to reflect that. So I mailed that to the state of Maine, and they mailed back a new birth certificate saying male. I thought that I was good, legit, above board, got my driver's license to say that, and then about 3 or 4 years after that, I was heading out for a trip overseas, and I realized my passport had expired. So I went to change my passport, and I updated it and said, here's my new birth certificate, I'm now male. And they said, no, that birth certificate is only good for your state gender, and you have a federal citizenship gender. Did you know you have a federal gender? I did not know that. And so I had to go through the whole rigmarole again of changing my gender a second time, which also annulled my same-sex civil union to my wife, so I had to get married to her again. And I'm also registered for selective service now. So there you go. I don't think over ground. Yeah.
When you were younger, did you have trouble deciding which public restroom to use?
No, there was a period in my life when I finally convinced my mother to let me cut my hair short. I was about 10 years old, and it was like the best day of my life that I got a buzz cut. And after that, for the year that I had short hair, I was kicked out of every women's room that I went into, which caused her much grief and caused me much delight. But once I came out and started passing as a guy, I've always used men's rooms. Yeah.
You were just saying that when you changed your gender officially, you actually had to remarry your wife because of the civil union. How was it with your other friends who don't? You were originally married to her in a civil union capacity. What was it like being able to marry your wife in a more, as an actual marriage compared to the difficulties your friends must face that don't have those rights?
Yeah, it's one of the weird things where suddenly coming out and living as transgender, I get male privilege and straight privilege, neither of which I've ever asked for, but they just kind of shower down on you in weird ways. And that is one of them. By dint of changing my birth certificate and my passport, I suddenly qualified for thousands of dollars of tax benefits, which I've done absolutely nothing to deserve. It's the same marriage and we're the same people as we were before. So it's just led me to question even more the strangeness of the system, the sort of legal system that we built around. Yeah.
How did you meet your wife?
We have the best story of meeting ever.
Wow,
I better tell it well. Okay, so the summer that I came out as transgender, I went to this wonderful GLBT group in Boston. It still exists. It's called Bagley. If you ever have a chance, interest in going, you should go. And they were doing this cruise of Boston Harbor for a kind of social get-together. And there was a dance floor with disco lights, and I was absolutely not dancing. And I was over by the railing of the boat, and my future wife came over to me, and she said, I don't mean to be rude, but I'm trying to figure out, are you a boy or a girl? And I said to her, so am I. And so that's what
Have you noticed have you noticed how straight privilege and white privilege and male privilege have changed since you have those affected your life?
So I think the most profound moment came somewhere in my senior year at Exeter or my freshman year at Harvard. So classes at Exeter, I don't know how classes are taught here, but classes at Exeter are taught round table, kind of Harkness style. Yeah, same here. I loved it. I was what they called at Exeter a Harkness warrior. Which meant that as a young woman, I was pushy, loud, obnoxious, aggressive, and rude. And so suddenly I came back as a guy, and I was smart. That was the difference. And that was communicated to me by the other students at the table and by the teachers in the room as well. That suddenly I wasn't being obnoxious by interrupting and speaking up. I was being intelligent. And when that sank in, I was horrified that that kind of gender dichotomy existed. But that's kind of, for me, the clearest example of all this difference. Yeah.
I don't even know how to ask this question, but you mentioned that you used to take testosterone. Are there health issues, complications that you still take testosterone? To what extent did that actually produce physical changes in you? Did you have surgery? Are there health complications or risks as a result of that? I'm sorry for the full framing of that question.
No, that's fine. So yes, I still take testosterone. It's something that most of the effects of the hormones are almost entirely reversible. So if I stopped taking it, I would no longer grow a beard. I think my voice would not become higher again, but that's about the only permanent change. So I haven't had surgery. For transgender people, if people elect to have surgery, it's usually called like top surgery and bottom surgery. Lots of FTMs, female to male, that's what I am, get top surgery. I have no interest in doing so. And testosterone causes what are called secondary sex characteristic changes. So a lower voice, growth of facial hair, loss of head hair, shifting muscle mass. So women tend to carry their fat in their hips and thighs, and guys tend to carry it in their belly. And that was sort of a magical realization. I was like, why do my pants no longer fit? When I started taking testosterone. Just more muscle mass in general, which is explains the massive physique you see. That's pretty much it. But hormones are really weird. And so I really was keen to see whether after I started taking testosterone, I would suddenly become better at math. No, that didn't happen. I think that disproves several social theories. But it does, I do feel that it changes my personality and emotions and thought process in ways that I have a tough time articulating. Yeah.
After you had the change in your body, did you just feel relieved?
Immensely relieved. It was really nice to feel at home in my body, and it was much easier to pass. Basically, I got to the age of 24, and I still looked 16. And I was about to start teaching full time, and I was about to start teaching a classroom of 9th graders. And I thought, this is going to be really awkward if I look 16 and they are 16. It was even more awkward to start taking testosterone and effectively go through puberty at the same time that they were going to. So that was it was not a fun year. It was like a lot of acne and my voice was breaking all the time. But simultaneously, of course, also going through menopause, so I was like sweating. It was fun. But I'm much happier now.
Do you have any awareness of how changing laws may vary state to state?
Hugely. It's almost ridiculous how much they vary state by state. In some states, you have to have had both top and bottom surgery well as a hysterectomy, as well as be on hormone therapy to change your birth certificate. That's, first of all, that's expensive. It's almost impossible. Very, very few people perform bottom surgery for FDNs. And it's just vastly intrusive to say that's what makes you a man. Other states have said we will never change birth certificates. We'll amend them. We won't ever change them. So it varies widely by state. And some states will let you change your gender on your license, but not your birth certificate. So it's just state by state, very peculiar, in an archaic system. Yeah.
So does traveling from state to state cause problems now?
No, although when my wife and I were getting married, we thought about going to Vegas to do that because at the time my driver's license said male before my birth certificate did, and I was like, oh, we'll just go to Vegas because they'll let you marry on a driver's license. And I thought, we really don't want to end up in jail in Nevada if this goes wrong. So I think that there are few states that would say my marriage was invalid, but I'm not putting that in evidence. Yeah.
You seem very confident in your identity, but was there any time that somebody challenged it, like outright, or you were made to question it?
That is a really good question. When I went out to Wyoming, I think I really had a chip on my shoulder. I was 18 going on 19, and I'd lived on the East Coast my whole life, and it's pretty easy. The East Coast is pretty liberal, and I felt like I had something to prove. Like, I wanted to show people that I could go anywhere and be a man on any terms. And I don't, now it's hard for me to remember exactly why I felt the need to do that. But at the time I remember feeling some people thought I wasn't really a man and I was going to show them that I was. I think actually I felt I wasn't really a man and I needed to prove to myself that I was. So I went to Wyoming, as they say. I was in the owl. Yeah.
Wait, what's the difference between, say, amending and
It's the difference between erasing female and writing male versus putting a post-it note on saying, yeah, now they're male, but they used to be female. I mean, not literally, but metaphorically. So it's like, you retain a record that you were once female.
Non-fiction. This is a historical fiction. So, is this your genre? Are you going to keep writing
Yeah, it's historical fiction, and I never thought I would write historical fiction. I've always just written sort of realistic, contemporary fiction. But I was thinking I wanted to write a novel, and a friend of mine gave me a really good piece of advice. She said, pick a topic that you love, because writing a novel is like getting married, and you're going to spend many, many, many years with this topic. And I thought, what story do I love? And immediately thought of Deborah Sampson's story. I said, this is something that I can spend years with. It's still going to happen. So that's why I wrote it. And as to what I write next, I have no idea. But I'd be surprised if it were historical fiction.
Well, if you lived during Deborah Sampson's time period, you could do the same as her.
I wish. I'd like to think I could, but she's tough. I mean, really, to have been born and raised in basically the same town, to be the only woman of her age group to not get married. Everybody else was married. And then to run away and disguise herself as a man. I mean, I can't imagine how fiercely independent she had to be. So I'd like to think I'd have the same guts as she did, but I don't know.
Similarly, what do you think Deborah would say about your experiences growing up and the transformation, if you will, in my word, just today?
Yeah. I think she'd be horrified by modern culture. I actually think in her own way she was a rather conservative person. But I also think that she'd be much happier living in a sort of free and liberal society. It's so hard. You know, one of the things that we take for granted is having words for things that today. So the very word transgender really let me be transgender, right? I heard the word, I was like, oh, that's what I am. Back in 1770, 1780, 1790, even 100 years later, there wasn't a word for being gay. That word did not come into existence until the mid to late 19th century. So what if you felt those things? Because of course there were people who did. There was just no word to easily explain what you were. And if there was a word, I can tell you it was not a positive word. And so I think I can't even imagine not having the vocabulary to describe how I felt. And that's the condition that she was born in. Yeah.
You and your brother have a close relationship?
We do. My brother's great. He's 2 years older than I am. And I think I can sum up our relationship in what he said when I came out to him as a lesbian. I said, you know, stuff like, I'm a lesbian. He said, that's great. You can go pick up chicks at the mall. Yeah.
I was wondering, do you think that there's like a difference between like physical, sorry, I'm trying to figure out how to word this. Do you think that there's a difference between like physical sex and do you think that gender it's like an idea an idea established like by stereotypes, and that if like we were able to get past having these like stereotypes of like gender, of what gender was, and people could see past like a biological gender and just see you for who you identify as and who you want to be seen as, do you think the surgery would have been necessary?
I have wrestled with that question for so, I wish I had the answer to it, because this is what I always wonder. I'd say, is there a world or culture in which the definition of woman is so expanded and so different from ours that I could be happy being defined as a woman, right? And all I can say is that I'm happier being on testosterone, and I'm happier being referred to with masculine pronouns, and so that makes me feel that it's not just about how society treats me.
Yeah, I guess I mean like just not being defined at all by the stereotypes.
I can't imagine what that would be, how that would feel, in what sort of culture that would exist. You know, the kind of classic saying when you're trying to explain the difference between gender and sex is to say gender is what's between your ears and sex is what's between your legs, right? I'm not so sure that I can imagine a world in which what you're saying, sort of gender, just doesn't exist.
I guess it'd be like 1984.
Big Brother watching you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is there a specific reason why you don't feel the need to have the surgery? If so, I have family members and they wanted the surgery, and if there was something that they raised money for, so I'm just curious.
Yeah, I've had a lot of FTM friends who have had surgery, and they've generally been, shall we say, better endowed than I am, right? So I think if I were chesty, that would be something that would be very important to me. I don't have to bind my chest, and that is probably what makes me feel like it's no big deal. And I've also seen the end results of top surgery, and it's not something where you necessarily be going to the beach and getting a tan topless. So there's not much incentive for me there. And it's expensive and invasive and all that stuff. But for some people, it's very important. Okay.
Now, was there anyone who was just totally unaccepting of your change in high school? I mean, you had known them for 3 years, and maybe you didn't know all of them, but for anyone who was just like, I can't accept you as well.
There was a math teacher, nothing against math teacher, and she was also my dorm parent. And I remember after a couple months of my being back, my senior year, she took me aside. She also refused to call me Alex, so she called me Alex. And she said, I can't wait till you come back for your 15th reunion, and we will just sit down with your husband and kids and laugh about this little date you're going through. And I just sort of said, be nice to her, don't get in trouble, don't say anything. And I was just back at Phillips Exeter for my 15th reunion. And they invited me to give a talk to the whole school. And she has retired, and she was in a retirement community, and she called. She somehow found out where I was staying and called my hotel room. She said, she didn't apologize directly, but she said, I just wanted to say, I'm very sorry I couldn't get to hear your talk, and I'm very glad that you're back at the academy, and I'm even glad that you're back as a man. And I thought, that was just about the nicest thing that someone could say to you. You know, it would have been nicer if she was like, sorry that I was rude to you way back in senior year, but that she remembered and she knew she had a little bridge to build. So. Yeah.
Have you seen like an evolution in society in terms of accepting transgender people since like you were 17 to now? Have you seen, like, do you feel more accepted?
Yeah, absolutely. There's much more awareness and visibility. There's celebrities who are transgender. You'll see the word transgender on magazine covers, and it's not like, you know, the transsexuals are coming for your children kind of thing. We're not, or at least I haven't gotten that. We are. It's just not freaky. You know, when I came out, there was a lot of talk shows. You know, there was this sort of satanic transsexual thing, and that's gone. It's like we might not be mainstream, but we are accepted and we're visible. And I would say the big difference is I've talked at schools for years and years and years, and I so often go to schools now, and the first question I ask of people is, do you have transgender students or faculty at your school? And more schools that I go to say, yes, we have transgender students at our school, or we had a student who graduated and just came out. Like, so there's an awareness within the student body that their peers are, or might be, or might become transgender, and that's huge. That's a massive change. Yeah.
Do you have any children?
No, I have 2 cats. They are my furry offspring. Exactly. They are my cats. Yes. Other questions? Yeah.
Are there any experiences you had before you came out that you're kind of happy with that you were a female?
Yeah, I will say the one thing that I miss, in the sort of opposite of male privilege and straight privilege, one of the things that I miss about coming out as trans and kind of passing as straight is I miss the close community of the GLBT community. And when I was a lesbian and when I was living openly and associating with a lot of GLBT people, that is a really tight, supportive, wonderful community space. And being transgender and not being so visibly queer, I lost that, and I miss that immensely. So that is something that would be a kind of sadness to yeah.
Have you and your wife ever gotten to a point where you wanted kids, but like didn't know like what to do essentially?
No, both of us kind of don't like children. So I'm fine with kids once they reach the age of like 12, 13, 14, which I think is the age when most parents would happily give their children away. Right? So that's why I love teaching high school. But below that age, and I'm like, why don't you understand reason? Because I have children, so I'm better off not. Cats are much more. Yeah.
Have you ever been in any relationships not with your wife, and if so, how do you like the whole dating process?
Don't tell her about that. No. Yes. Prior to marrying my wife, I dated women, and actually, interestingly, most of the women I dated either were bisexual, and my wife was bisexual, or had identified as lesbians. So, and I think you could say on some level, like a female-female relationship was where they were comfortable. I think that I've talked to some of the women that I've dated. Again, most of them have gone on to be in other lesbian relationships. One of them is in a straight relationship now, and it's interesting to reminisce with them and talk about how dating a transgender person affected their own understanding of sexual orientation. It kind of, again, to use a word that I know some people find offensive, but I use it in a positive way. Being transgender really queers the notion of sexual orientation, right? So in order to say you're a lesbian, you have to first be able to say that you're a woman. And if you're transgender, or you're dating someone who's transgender, what does that say about your sexual orientation? Are you attracted to a man or a woman? Or you're attracted to someone who's transgender? So it kind of destabilizes or queers that. I think I have time for one more question. Yes?
Well, just to complete that thought maybe, do you see a really, just besides the fact of sort of a temporary relationship versus a lasting one with your wife, is there a real difference in the dynamic between being in a lesbian relationship and being in a relationship with you as a man and her as a woman?
I don't think I would define our relationship as a straight relationship. I think it's very much a queer relationship. But yeah, I think there is a difference. And I think actually a lot of it has to do with how you're read by other people. I think a lot of how you carry yourself as a couple has to do with how the people around you perceive and treat you and what they expect from your relationship. So I brought some books. If anyone wants to purchase a copy, I'll happily sign it. If you have other questions that you want to ask me afterwards, I'm here. And you've been a delightful audience, and I thank you very much for your attention.